I just can't do it. And if we have holes in the plate, we get holes in the image. If you cover half your plate, you lose half your image. If you shatter a photographic plate, the image is destroyed. So we've discovered then that cameras are inadequate, totally inadequate, as a description of the way that our minds work. And this is even though they're a fairly recent technological development within the last 150 years, in fact. So the question then is there anything in our modern technology that can give us a better comparison for what goes on inside our heads? The answer is fortunately yes. Within the last 25 years, we've developed what is known as holography. This is a three-dimensional form of photography, and we have here a simple illustration to explain it. A laser beam is split into two. One half of the beam travels towards the object to be photographed. The beam sprays off it, and some of the rays go towards the photographic plate. The other half of the beam is reflected so that it approaches the photographic plate at a different angle. Now, where this part of the beam and this beam meet at the plate, they interfere with each other so that the waves, the high waves and low waves of the light, interrupt. And we get what is known as an interference pattern. Now, that interference pattern is recorded on the plate. And if you take away the plate, it has that interference pattern on it. You can't see it, but it's actually there. If you then take away this part of the beam and the object and put the plate back, this reference beam reproduces out here the original object so that it actually looks like the original. It's a three-dimensional ghost image. So let's have a brief entry into the world of holography. This is a three-dimensional image of the brain. When I take away the solid object, the ghost still remains. Now, the three-dimensional ghost there can actually be probed. You can put your finger through it. It's completely in space behind this holographic plate. Another extraordinary feature of these is that if I take out the plate on which the image is contained, I can look through it, you see nothing on it, but the image is in fact contained within this plate in billions and billions and billions of tiny image centers. We can also, in this three-dimensional holography, get perspective, so that if we move, we can actually see around the three-dimensional photograph that we've taken. Now, another extraordinary feature of the hologram is that if we cover up roughly half of the plate, we can actually look around the side of it and still see, or in fact uncover, the images behind. Very similar to looking through a window with a curtain which has been half drawn. Now, there are a number of other extraordinary qualities about these lasers. The image that they project is a three-dimensional ghost. It's absolutely real. You can walk around it, and if you walk around to the back, you see the back. If you look at it from above, you see from above. So they're using these, obviously, in a number of ways. For example, in theatre, the Hamlet scenes where you have a ghost actually becomes a holographic ghost. You can put your hand through it, probe around. It really has all the standard qualities that ghosts are supposed to have. You can get your Cheshire cat smiling at you with no body, with a hologram. Now, another thing about these is that if you take your plate and shatter it, and then pick up any one of the particles of that plate, that particle, whichever one it happens to be, will still contain the image, so that each part of the holographic plate contains enough information to reproduce the entire original image. So let's have a look at that by first taking this plate, which has got the holograph of atoms on it, and then we're going to shatter it. Now, if I take one of these pieces and get it at the right angle, it will in fact reproduce that original image. And if we were able to move around more with this particular piece, we would see the whole atom. Now, this is very, very similar to the way that your brain works. Each cell contains whole structures of patterns which are duplicated in other cells. I said that holography was much nearer the truth, but really it's not even the half of it. Your brain is infinitely more complex, more multidimensional, more advanced, more refined. Just think of a familiar object and the myriad ways your mind can play with it.
If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today, you better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day that teddy bears have their
That was some picnic, but now let's get down to some real work. What I want to do is to instill a bit of imagination into those two-dimensional black and white patterns we saw at the beginning. So if we look at the bottom center, words, we could replace it by our hook symbol. Then we could add a bit of depth to memory. So our centers now make a more immediate impact. And instead of the word I, we could do a little sketch. You should remember from the I program that we defined reading as the way you interacted with symbols. The first 4 stages were recognition, registration, comprehension, and integration. Another aspect was perception. Remember we said look for color, shape, size, texture, so we can make the lettering reflect these ideas. Now, the basic idea is becoming clear now, and our 2-page notes are taking form. Remember, the right-hand side is for your linear information and graphs. Now, we've seen up to this point that the mind is far more holographic, dimensional than we have previously thought. And we know that these patterns have to be in some form a reflection of our minds, internal patterning. So we need some kind of method for taking this more or less off the page. And there are a number of ways of doing this. Firstly, we can use arrows. The arrows connect parts of the pattern which can't be connected on a normal page. Here, for example, we have shape and we've got symbols. So we have an arrow which connects those 2 parts of the pattern. Now, the arrow, of course, doesn't simply have to be single-headed. We can add other arrows so that the head can become multiply pronged. And also, an arrow isn't always one direction. It can have 2 directions. The information can more or less swing back and forward between itself. So we add here another arrowhead. Now, in addition to arrows, in order to make these things more dimensional, to show that the links are not just on the page, but in a sense, to use shapes. Now, I'm not going to build up lots of information on here, but just to show you the kind of shapes that can be used. You might have other sections, and you can use, for example, rectangles to signify certain kinds of ideas. You can have triangles, circles,